My name is Brian Carovillano. I'm also with the Associated Press. And as Vice President and Managing Editor, a big part of my area of responsibility is AP's enterprise and investigative reporting around the world. And that's actually what I'm here to talk about a little bit today. I was actually originally invited to give a speech with the proposed title of Investigative Journalism and Outdated Practice, ? And I wish I could give a speech with that title, and I wish that investigative journalism was an outdated practice, because that would mean that there's no longer any injustice in the world. It would mean that there's no longer any need for the rich and powerful to be held to account for their actions. It would mean that there was total transparency about how public funds were being used and dispersed. And it would mean that governments, militaries, corporations, and other powerful institutions around the world always and invariably acted in service of the public good, and that they never have anything to hide. And sadly, that is not the case at all. In fact, I would say at no point in my career as a journalist, which spans more than 20 years, has the need for investigative journalism been greater. Transparency is on the decline around the world. Injustice is, in fact, on the rise. And growing inequality is a global trend, and it's increasingly driving the political agenda around the world. The kind of meticulous forensic reporting that investigative journalists do is now more valuable than ever. Also, the technological tools we have with which to do this kind of reporting is making possible stories that weren't even conceivable a generation ago. From sophisticated data analysis tools and software that can instantly analyze millions of pages of documents, to the use of satellite imagery and drones, to artificial intelligence and machine learning. So for all those reasons, I kind of made the decision here not to give a presentation called Investigative Journalism and Outdated Practice, ? The name of this presentation, as you can see on the screen, is Investigative Reporting, More Important Than Ever. The origins of investigative reporting spring from the simple concept that a society needs a free and inquisitive press. In the United States, for example, this belief was enshrined in a portion of the U.S. Constitution that's known as the Bill of Rights. And that reads, as you can see on the screen, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It was the journalists of the Industrial Revolution in the late 19th and early 20th century who really gave rise to the idea of deeply investigating a single topic, sometimes for months and even years at a time. And the work of these journalists has changed and continues to change the course of history. And that history teaches us that it has been during times of great upheaval and division when investigative journalism has been most essential and when it's had the most impact. Let me give you a few examples. One of these eras was the turn of the 20th century, when there was a tremendous flood of immigrants from Europe into the United States. And they came to find work in factories where the working conditions were absolutely deplorable and often deadly. That period gave us the work of Tarbell and Upton Sinclair. Sinclair wrote in stomach-churning detail about the conditions in meat-packing plants in his book, The Jungle. This work helped drive the labor movement in America and in Europe, which over time resulted in dramatic improvements in working conditions and the rise of the progressive movement around the world. If you want to talk about journalistic impact, how about the 40-hour work week and something that we all take now for granted, which was invented at this time, the weekend. The late 1960s and early 1970s was another time of great political upheaval. Journalists at the New York Times and other American news outlets, relying on leaked government reports that became collectively known as the Pentagon Papers, revealed that successive presidential administrations had misled the public about the level of U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. Also at that time, Seymour Hersh, who was a freelance journalist working in Vietnam, revealed one of the worst wartime atrocities of the 20th century when he reported on the massacre of civilians by U.S. troops at My Lai. These reports played a major role in turning the tide of public opinion against the war. Historians now look at that journalism, as well as the dispatches of journalists braving daily dangers on the battlefields of Vietnam, with helping to bring about the end of that war. Of course, the social unrest of the late 60s and early 70s was only partly driven by the anti-war movement. It was also a time marked by the civil rights struggle in the United States and the assassinations of both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. One of the most famous stories of that era was that of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. Their dogged source reporting for the Washington Post led to the Watergate scandal and the resignation of U.S. President Richard Nixon in the early 1970s. These are journalists whose work helped influence the course of history, who worked during times of great division and great upheaval in the world. And I'm here to tell you, friends, that we are living in just such a time. Many countries around the world are struggling with an economic climate in which a majority of individuals continue to amass more and more wealth while the masses fall farther and farther behind. Things we all see as pathways to a better life: good jobs, home ownership, higher education, access to better technology are unattainable to many people around the world. Also, a growing number of people are relying exclusively on social networks for news and information. This has some benefits, but it also allows them to tune out perspectives and points of view that don't conform to their own opinions. This has caused an information crisis that makes fake news believable and real news easily dismissed by politicians as fake. This is a toxic mix that has been a factor in the dissolution of long, stable political alliances in Europe. Think about Brexit, think about Catalonia. And it has also emboldened authoritarian leaders around the world. This has been a pronounced trend in the United States, where the divisions between right and left are profound. The democratic system of government, which relies on reaching consensus through informed debate around a commonly accepted set of facts, breaks down when there are neither accepted facts nor consensus. And this is why we need investigative journalism now more than ever. Fortunately, we're living in a golden age for this type of reporting. This is partly because journalists have access to tools and to technology that were unheard of a generation ago. At the AP, we've made great use of satellite imagery in our investigative journalism, using it as a window into some of the most dangerous places on Earth. We used it to locate mass graves in Syria and to confirm that the Islamic State had destroyed treasured historic sites in northern Iraq. This satellite image of fishing boats off the coast of Papua New Guinea allowed AP reporters to locate trawlers that had escaped a government raid of a slave island in Indonesia. That was a follow-up to an earlier AP investigation that revealed the existence of this island. On this island, hundreds of Burmese and Cambodian men were being held against their will and employed as slaves on Thai fishing boats. That series of stories resulted in the freeing of more than 3,000 slaves. Here on the screen is a picture of one of those men being reunited with his family in Burma afterward. He had spent 22 years as a slave, and this was the first time he had seen his family, and our cameras were there to capture that reunion. So if you're questioning whether investigative reporting can have the same impact in 2017 that it had in 1906 or 1973, there's your evidence. More recently, Washington Post reporter David Fahrenthold made novel use of social media in his reporting last year on Donald Trump's charitable giving, or lack thereof, as it turned out. Fahrenthold used Twitter to crowdsource his investigation, asking the public for tips and suggestions. This effort had the added impact of creating total transparency around a process that historically has been held in a lot of secrecy right up to the point of publication. But in Fahrenthold's case, everyone who followed him on Twitter knew exactly what he was working on all year long. Cutting-edge technology also enables greater collaboration between journalists, often working in different countries and using different languages. Such tools allow journalists at Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung and more than 100 other news organizations around the world to collaborate on a single investigative project, which won this year's Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting, known as the Panama Papers. They work together to efficiently pore over millions of documents, again using cutting-edge tools, and reveal the secret havens where the world's rich and famous stash their money. This project launched more than 150 criminal investigations in more than 70 countries around the world and has led to the conviction or resignation of numerous corrupt officials. Since investigative reporting remains a risky, even dangerous proposition in many countries, This kind of collaboration across borders may be the best strategy for continuing to shine light in dark places. Projects like this give me a lot of hope for the future of investigative journalism. It's one of the reasons my employer, the AP, as well as many other news organizations, are not only maintaining their commitment and their investment in investigative journalism, they're expanding it. And this is really notable at a time when the news industry faces unprecedented economic challenges. It also comes at a time when doing this kind of work has really never been more dangerous or risky. In recent years, the rise of nonprofit investigative outfits like ProPublica in the United States and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists has contributed to a resurgence in this kind of reporting. There are now nonprofit investigative reporting outfits in more than 50 countries around the world and counting. The AP has long been committed to investigations, including having done some of our most important work right here in Asia. In 1999, a team of AP journalists revealed the massacre of civilians by US troops under a railroad bridge at Nogun-ri in South Korea. And of course, I've already mentioned the seafood by slaves, an AP investigation that was centered in Thailand, Indonesia, and Myanmar. Of course, not all our investigative reporting is quite so glamorous, nor so global. Local investigative reporting is also an essential part of what we and other news organizations do. And it can be dirty work, quite literally. In 1991, AP reporters who were working with colleagues at a local newspaper in South Carolina in the American South used construction equipment to dig through a trash dump to recover discarded documents detailing the misuse of taxpayer funds by the state university system there. They found the documents, which had been sprayed with human waste to accelerate decomposition. And that story led to the conviction of the university president, who had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money on gifts, vacations, and other luxuries for himself. At the AP, we currently have investigative reporters in locations all around the world who do this work as a full-time job, and many more of them who contribute to investigations all year long. And we plan to grow that team and to devote more resources to investigative reporting in the months and years ahead. We've also just hired a new global investigative editor to run all of this. His name is Mike Hudson, and he comes to us from the International Consortium for Investigative Journalism, where he edited the Panama Papers and a more recent project there called the Paradise Papers, which was published in the last few weeks. At the AP, we stand ready to collaborate and coordinate with our partners and colleagues around the world, not only on investigative projects, but on all kinds of journalism that advances what we see as one of the core contributions of journalism to society, to hold the powerful to account. This is not only good journalism that leads to good public policy, it's also good for business. In a crowded media landscape with an ever-growing number of news outlets competing for eyeballs and for attention, the best investigative reporting stands out from the noisy clamor. Our usage metrics consistently show that our investigations are among the most widely used AP content by our customers, and that's true across all media formats. Readers and viewers tend to spend more time engaged with reporting that has real depth and that breaks news. And that's true in print, on broadcast outlets, and online. And that's, I think, very good news for the future of journalism and for what we all do and hold dear. So no, I don't think investigative journalism is an outdated concept at all. On the contrary, I think it remains at the core of what we do as journalists, and it's as big a part of our future as it is of our past. Thanks for letting me talk about it a little bit with you all, for having me.